Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder, to a first impressions on some of the Japanese heavy cruisers. And I say here the heavy cruisers in particular because, as you can see in the background, I am playing the IJN Furutaka, later on followed by the IJN Kako. And in fact, the IJN Kako is probably my favorite personal ship in this patch so far. Now, this is our first impressions. This is maybe a very raw overlook with some tendencies explained or outlined, but not a review. Please take this into account. I have waited personally for quite some time and was very eager to get my hands on ships with 8-inch guns, because bigger guns are always amazing, right? Well, yes and no, and in particular, the Kirov has absolutely spoiled me, and that's just what it comes down to. So I will compare here them a bit to the Kirov to just explain what I mean by that. Now, what you can see here is probably a little bit of boring gameplay. I don't think that it's particularly interesting to watch, and in particular because the video can take up to half an hour. So what I do here is using also the torpedoes in the encounter mode, and I think encounter mode is for cruisers, heavy cruisers in particular, the mode. But it is, well, easy to rig, if you will. You can avoid fighting the enemy players and just go immediately after the AI units. You can whittle them down and give your team a huge points advantage, if not then quickly also win the game. So I use here the torpedoes, and the torpedoes need a special mention. Those are the fantastic, the amazing, the one and only long lances, the 610mm Type 93 torpedoes, of which the Furutaka has 16, 8 per broadside in one quadruple launcher per side, because you actually can reload them, which is also pretty amazing. Now, what's so special about those torpedoes? Well, they are pretty cool in that respect that they have a 20-kilometer range, and that in combination with a 93 kilometer per hour top speed. They also have quite a hefty warhead of nearly half a ton of TNT, and so you can see that you can easily, right from the very start, drop those torpedoes either in anticipation of an enemy coming down a narrow strait, or in this case, just going for the AI units. And then there is not that much left for the enemy players to do. Either they have to turn their ship into the torpedo to sacrifice themselves, allowing their AI units to live just a little bit longer before the second set of torpedo comes in, or they just try to shoot up the torpedoes. Apparently that is a thing in this patch. But to hit the torpedo, especially such a fast one, and to be aware of this torpedo while you are in a gunnery duel with a destroyer or a cruiser, I have my doubts. But sometimes it also happens that you can just destroy somebody that happens just to be in the way, and then you get a player kill, which is always nice, in particular if it happens on an enemy cruiser. And so there you can see that I try to drop here the torpedoes on the merchant ships. In particular, I want to bring your attention to the fact that you have to focus with 1 or 2 torpedoes on the enemy Emden, which is, you know, the cruiser, which is not that easy to take down at range with gunfire anytime soon. And so a torpedo that removes this AI unit, this heavily armored AI unit, is always worth it. So now let's talk about the guns. Finally, let's talk about the guns after I just praised the torpedoes so much. What other guns are like? Are they amazing? Are they just absolutely game breaking? Are they worth going for? Well, yes, I personally have fun playing them. But before I talk about them further, you need to see this from my perspective. I like to have some alpha strike. I like to switch between HE and AP and focus on the enemy, depending on which kind of targets I'm shooting, cruiser or destroyer, and in which state it is, range and angle, etc. So this is always something that I love to play around with. So I kind of have an understanding. That's not arrogance, but after all the hundreds and thousands matches that I played in naval forces, I better should know what I'm doing, right? So the 20 centimeter or 8-inch guns, what are they like? Well, they have a very nice alpha strike, but the reload is, as expected, pretty long. The funny thing is here the comparison with the Kirov, because normally, you see always the ongoing power creep, new nation, new vehicles at the same battle rating, always better, bigger, faster, and with more firepower. It's not quite the same here with those IJN heavy cruisers, because they are... Well, it's difficult to say, but I think the Kirov is still significantly better. See, the Kirov has a reload of 11 seconds with 9 guns in 3 triple turrets. The Furutaka has, well, 3 twin turrets with 8-inch guns with a reload of 15 seconds, and the IJN Kako has then a reload of 15.2 seconds for the thicc single mountings. And then there are the shells. The ammunition is fairly similar between the two ships, but I think the little bit better performing is with the IJN Furutaka, of course. So let's talk about the Furutaka's HE shells. The stock HE shell for free has an explosive filler of 8.2 kilograms of TNT. The TNT filler for the 7-inch guns of the Kirov is 7.9 kilos, but the TNT equivalent is 12 kilos. So you can see that the Kirov has the higher rate of fire with more guns, heavier broadside, and more TNT filler by 50% per shell. Still, the Furutaka hits really hard. Then the second shell type is the 20.3 centimeter type 91 armor piercing. It's an armor piercing ballistic cap shell, and it delivers 3.11 kilograms of TNT filler. Look, again, the Kirov has here the advantage because the AP-CBC round is faster and delivers 2.8 kilograms. But the real punchy thing that the Kirov has going for it is the semi-armor piercing ballistic cap, which delivers nearly 11 kilograms of TNT filler. So you can see why the Kirov is still something that is far from being obsolete. And at close quarters, you better not face the USS Brooklyn. The Alpha Strike is there, okay, but the turrets are fragile, and this is where I begin to run down the drawbacks. First of all, the ship cannot really take all that much punishment. It has a fairly well protected citadel, but versus Kirov and Brooklyn, especially at close quarters, and with all the repair mechanisms in place where you just get punished for having a leak and a fire at the same time and want to repair something, yeah, this is the problem with those ships. And on top of this, the turrets are pretty fragile. They're protected in the Furutaka's case by a 20mm, surrounding, and that is not a lot. That is just not simply sufficient to absorb even HE shells from destroyers. That's really annoying. And then you combine this with the reloads. Yeah, you kind of see where your DPM is going. It's not going up. And this is really painful. So the ship is a classical case of a glass cannon, or those two ships. They pack a punch, but they don't pack the biggest punch in the game. Again, that goes down to the Kirov. The turrets are pretty fragile, and I think then in encounter, one of your major weapons is then simply the long lance. So, do I like the Furutaka? I think it is a good ship. It's fast, it's maneuverable for a heavy cruiser at the moment, But I only think that if we see this trend continuing within War Thunder, then either with the next patch or within 2 patches we will see the arrival for heavy cruisers throughout all the nations, including Germany with the Admiral Hipper class, for Britain, and I'm not even quite sure what the Soviets bring to the table, and also the Americans have quite a few heavy cruisers to choose from. And then those ships are obsolete, so they are amazing for this patch, maybe the next patch, and then they kind of have a few problems with the rate of fire and with their overall performance, reload, etc, etc. And again, it's not as if I would hate on those ships, quite the opposite, I like them, but they just seem to have some problems. Now, if you now pay attention to the gameplay, you can see that the first torpedoes are arriving on the enemy side, and we are just killing an Emden, which is probably the most important AI unit to destroy, and then some cargo ships. Some of the torpedoes either have missed or I don't know what happened, they are still on the way. But this is then the advantage of the long lance, so you can just really ruin the enemy's days. Let's quickly talk about the torpedoes of the and Kako, because they are really worth talking about. If we quickly look at them, they are not the long lances, but something similar. They also have a travel distance of 20 kilometers, but they are significantly slower with only 50 kilometers per hour. You have also quite a few of them, namely 24. Wow, that is a lot. Yeah, but you really have to know how to use them, because they are not in a launcher like on any other ship within War Thunder that has torpedoes, but they are like on side fixed mountings. A bit like on some of the patrol boats, right? But only sideways. And to give full broadside is kind of risky and kind of takes a lot of time, especially then if you want to go to places. But again, you have quite a few of them, and so you can spread the joy around. 6 tubes per side, and this is where you can see that in some situations the Furutaka is better, and in certain situations the and Kako is better. Now, if you then want to know why the Kako is actually my more favorite ship, I have to specifically mention here the guns, because the problem with the Furutaka is it receives a shell and one or both front turrets are knocked out, and again you then have a severely reduced amount of firepower, whereas the Kako has 6 turrets that you need to take out before you silence it, and that is not really that likely. And then it seems to just simply keep the rate of fire better than the Furutaka. If you receive damage, if you burn, if you have to pump out the water, etc. So I think when we then talk here about the negatives, when we talk about the fragility of the turrets, again only 25mm of armor on both ships, another factor has to be mentioned, and this is the anti-aircraft capabilities, and they are pretty weak. So to mention here every single factor would take quite a bit of time, but let me just explain you the basics. First of all, your short range AA is only 25mm, and they are not the best, they are pretty pitiful. And if you then look at the Kako, it only has 2 double mountings of them. The Furutaka, it looks a bit better with 6 double mountings, but still that's not a lot of Daka. And the range is not as great as with the 40mm, and the performance is also not that great compared to the American 40mm Bofors. Then let's talk about the heavy anti-aircraft batteries, and on both ships we are looking at overall 4 120mm guns, but they have only normal flak shells or HE shells, no proximity fuse shells, and that's all that you have to defend yourself versus aircraft. Yes, on the Furutaka the main batteries also have some heavy flak shells, but with that low reload, or with that slow reload, and then also with the rather slow turret rotation speed, they're really not all that effective. So aircraft are a huge minus point, and that is really annoying. So you might win a gun duel versus an enemy. He then jumps in a plane and has a reasonable chance of torpedoing you successfully for the revenge kill, which is something that I absolutely dislike, this revenge kill mentality. One thing that I have to point out here is the overall feel of the ship, right? And this is something that goes beyond numbers. What sets War Thunder apart from certain games, from certain other games that might be a little bit similar in its overall, well, theater of vehicles that they cover with planes, ships, and also tanks, I think a special mention goes to the feel of the vehicles. If you drive a tank, it is more than just a pile of pixels. If you fly a plane, it's not just only moving the cursor over the screen. It feels like every kind of vehicle, vessel has a certain character. And those heavy cruisers certainly feel like big ships. And the guns feel like they are big guns. This ship feels like, well, a heavy cruiser. When I drive a destroyer, I feel like I'm in a destroyer. I mean, I never served in the Navy in particular, but, you know, compared to World of Warships, which is obviously the closest rival, if you will, then you just simply are in a big ship, and it doesn't really sometimes feel like a big ship, and all because of some Excel data sheet delivering the numbers. That's all that you got for the feel, right? And then you're down to RNG. The reliability of the guns is nice. The satisfaction of just blasting an enemy destroyer out of the water or winning a gun duel versus another cruiser is just deeply satisfying. My criticism towards Gaijin, calling them out for some of their shenanigans they always try to do, is well known. But I wouldn't really always rant all this like that, with that intensity, if I wouldn't know that there is so much potential in the game. And this is what those heavy cruisers deliver. They are yet another ship, a very slow step, which I approve, by the way, towards bigger ships. Bit by bit, we can enjoy bigger and bigger ships. Do you remember when the KMS Emden was the master of the seas? Do you remember when then the Köln arrived and was just the big boss? In the last patch it was undoubtedly the Kirov and the Brooklyn, and now we have a new contester for some of the better gunboats, or the gunships rather, in War Thunder. I like this, but again, those ships are just not really competitive in future patches, so you have to then take this into account. But for the time, those are the biggest guns in the game, and they just have this oomph. They just have this feeling of power, and I absolutely love this. However, when it comes to the playstyle, you cannot YOLO around a corner like in the USS Brooklyn and just mow down everything, patrol boat, destroyers and cruisers alike. The shorter the distance, the better. No, this is, or those ships, again, the IJN Furutaka and the IJN Kako, those are long-range specialists. Those are they are not really glass cannons, because they have effective armor. But again, cruiser guns versus that kind of armor, 6-inch guns and 8-inch guns versus 3-inch armor belts, you know, that's just going one way or another, and mostly the guns win. And yet, I'm satisfied with what I'm seeing, you know, and this is quite the opposite of what I experienced with the PG02 in the last video. So after this mid-tier bullshit, you know, that you experience with this Gatling gun hydrofoil nonsense stranding shit, this is the reward. And the reward at the moment feels like it's worth it. And that is then so far everything that I need to say. Another thing is that if you talk here about this Mediterranean port map, the normal battle mode with the 3 capture zones, I've never seen it so far. And that's for the better. And I have made it clear that I would absolutely despise this idea and that it would be stupid to spawn heavy cruisers and destroyers 5 kilometers from each other. So it could have been made definitely worse. There are definitely some improvements visible and feelable, but it's still far from perfect. Yet in this aspect, I think Gaijin is on a good way. Now, it is now 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm really tired. Yet I had fun playing them, and I think this is what War Thunder could deliver, what War Thunder should deliver. And if I wouldn't be a YouTuber, I definitely would think about buying myself into the closed beta of Japanese ships and then invest in premiums or premium time rather, and then grind my way up as fast as possible. That's my opinion. However you might want to value my opinion is down to you or up to you. But I for myself think that they're cool. They're really cool. They're nice. They're not overpowered. They just don't make any other ship completely obsolete by default, and that is just how it should be. An improvement step by step. Yes, there is not always the opportunity to do so, and we will see more and more imbalance then with the next few patches at various different battle ratings. I get that. That's just how it is. But I think for the moment, naval battles are in a more or less acceptable state. And that is also down to the battle time. That then brings me to the final problem, and that is the reward. So the ships, you can actually run them quite cheaply with the stock HE because it packs so much TNT. Yes, I know Kirov is better, but that's just how it is. But those ships will not make you poor. And this is again something that I want to point out. They are ranging here for the cruisers between 6,000 and 10,000 silver lines of repair costs. And that is acceptable. The armor piercing per shot 70 silver lines. That's expensive, but you don't fire that many of them all the time. And I think this is then something acceptable. If you remember the previous patch where some of the German light cruisers had a repair bill of, what was it, 20, 30,000 silver lines? Oof. That was just crazy. But now I think this is in a reasonable state at the moment. And I agree that it might not be the most thrilling thing to watch here, but it has some satisfying sides to play it. Okay, blapping a Project 159, despite it being a bot. Hey, can you really blame me for that? So, yeah, I've seen worse. I've definitely seen worse, and this is something that I want to see more of. I cannot wait for even bigger ships, but I value also the smaller ships. But currently, I just need to play more of them because they're satisfying, they're cool, and they're just the biggest boys on the playground. So this is, I'm just constantly repeating myself. I don't want to praise it too much, but there is definitely nothing fundamentally wrong with those ships, which isn't kind of historically accurate or so. We could talk about the battle distance, we could talk about spawns and the meta, but for those heavy cruisers, they are currently on top of the food chain next to obviously the Kirov and also the USS Brooklyn. And I think that it doesn't make previous ships completely obsolete is nice. I I was not on the dev server. I had no idea what it would be like. So this is now really my first experience, my first few dozen battles or so in those ships. The battle time is nice. It's not over after like 5 minutes. You have a good battle. 8-inch firepower is satisfying. Yet I think that the Kirov needs to be tuned down. This is something that I have to give a thumbs up. Yeah, that's just as simple as it goes, right? There is nothing completely wrong with this. There is nothing really outstandingly frustrating about this. It is more about your aim and your skill and positioning and using your weapons. And so a few minutes later, where nothing happened in the meantime, I came across this situation, and this shall be quickly demonstrating what's going on. So again, I focus here on this ship, which is one of the last players in the game, I guess. And then I see, oh, big unit, what is it? Let's swing the guns around. We have armor piercing only left, and that looks like a Köln. And so we aim for the front ammo rack, but it was just a touch too high. Still, we did not insignificant amount of damage. Now let's aim for the rear section of that ship, and oh yes, that was an ammo hit. Brief look at the post-battle results. For that kind of battle time, which was over 30, nearly 35 minutes, I got 50,000 civilians and nearly 12,000 vehicle research points with a non-premium ship, and as far as I'm aware, there was only a 10% RP booster. 8 AI units, 7 players, 1 kill assist and 1 death were the case, and being first place with over 3,000 score points is always nice. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Please give this video a like if it did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the waves of War Thunder.